Is justice even possible if it's not interfaith?
No, no. We don't need a podcast for that. No.
There it is. One word and we've done.
Welcome to episode 5 of this Ignatian year. My name is Paola Pascual Ferrat, and I am Assistant Professor of Communication at Loyola University Maryland. I am joined by my co-host, Sean Bray, Assistant Vice President for Mission at Loyola University Maryland. And today we are so grateful to be joined by our colleague and friend, Rev Scott Adams, who serves as Assistant Director for Interfaith and Ecumenical Ministries at Loyola. Scott is, apart from being a great friend, he has been a leader at Loyola in many ways, but most importantly in his work on interfaith through campus ministry. I've had the pleasure of working with him for about, maybe 3 years now on interfaith strategic planning. And Scott also serves as the senior pastor of Heritage United Church of Christ here in Baltimore. He received a master's degree in theology from Duke University School of Divinity. He holds a master's degree in theology from St. Mary's Seminary and a bachelor's degree in psychology from James Madison University. Scott, we are so grateful to have this conversation with you today. Yeah, let's get started, Sean.
This is an exciting conversation. It's one that I feel like Scott and I get to be in a lot because of our work together. And Scott is someone who exemplifies this work. And whenever I think about Scott and this work, there's an Ignatian phrase that always comes to mind, and it's the magis, because Scott is always looking to the vision of what could be. And he has a heart for ministry, for justice, for belonging, inclusion, and he brings that to his work. And so it's a real honor to have you join us in this conversation today, Reverend Scott. And throughout this conversation, throughout these podcasts, as people have joined us, they'll know that this is the Ignatian year, and it's a time of telling Ignatius's story, or parts of Ignatius's story, and then for us to dive down a little deeper into exploring some of those themes that came from that origin story, really, themes that really permeated and became the foundation for Ignatian spirituality, and moving into the pedagogy, as well as this educational system that we're a part of. And so today, would you share what led you into this interfaith work?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me, you and Paula, allowing me to be here. It's an honor and a privilege to share in this conversation with friends and colleagues in this capacity. So I just want to say thanks for that, and I'm glad to be here. What led me into interfaith? I think a variety of experiences and encounters. But let me just begin with my call to ministry. In my call to ministry, when I found myself being led to move in the direction of serving as a minister in society, I found myself also seeking a deeper encounter with community, not only with God, but with community from my present context of my local church. There was something more, something that a thirst that I felt had to do more with the ministry of being a part of a community and serving that community than in the particular space that I was already in, the context that I was already in. And so I began to seek to discover what that might be. I was so new to ministry, I didn't know. I didn't have any idea. You don't know what you don't know. But I just entered seminary at St. Mary's here in Baltimore, and I asked questions. One of the things that I've learned is not giving answers, not talking about what I know, but asking questions to learn what I don't know. And thankfully, I was led into the space of hospital chaplaincy and began providing care to people, patients and their families, as well as hospital staff from all faith traditions, having to learn about their particular rituals, beliefs, and practices, and to provide spiritual care for everybody, including those who didn't have an identity with a particular or formal faith tradition or spirituality. So that meant that I would have to serve and be present with atheists and agnostics whenever the request arose. And that's really, to me, what interfaith work is: being present and active listening and engaging in conversation, seeking first to understand and then being understood, and that presence or that adjacency, I think connects very well with the spirituality of Ignatius, just being companions in the spaces that we occupy and share together. We being companions in community. And one of the things that really undergirds everything that would, I guess, epitomize what I'm speaking of is the whole formation and reality of beloved community. I always talk about beloved community and really engaging this work in a very authentic way. So that's really how I was introduced to interfaith and ecumenical work. And then the second experience or encounter was my work in prisons and working with and serving impacted persons of what I call the criminal injustice system, right? We're dealing with the prison industrial complex and how we can be present with individuals who are impacted by this system of injustice in many ways, especially with Black and brown human beings and their families. And so I worked with prisons and really, again, that's a very, very diverse population and community of individuals, and really to be present in those spaces as well. So hospitals and prisons really have been my introduction and work and continuous participation in the service of interfaith and ecumenical work.
So Scott, I like that you mentioned and focused on this driven by the need and the desire to care for the whole person. And I think I would like to ask you, within the Jesuit Catholic University context that the three of us work at, I know in Loyola in particular, one of our core values is cura personalis, so care for the whole person. And that definitely is very relevant to what you just mentioned as to your own experience in both the prison and healthcare setting. The other core value is to make sure we're preparing students for a changing and diverse world, right? And so I guess as a colleague, you and I have worked together for some time now, an interfaith work at Loyola, but just broadly speaking, for Jesuit Catholic universities, can you talk a little bit about the place and the importance of this kind of work in advancing our mission as Jesuit Catholic institutions?
Absolutely. I think it's absolutely essential. This work is essential to advance the mission. So when we talk about cura personalis and care for the whole person, right, that doesn't mean that humanity is monolithic and that human beings are a homogeneous way or are steeped or consumed or grounded in homogeneity, right? Everybody is diverse. Everybody is different. And we're all individuals. Now, we're one body, one corporate being of humanity altogether. But I think the challenge of our society, especially in this country, is that there's this expectation that people have to be the same. I think the care for the whole person is really identifying and respecting and honoring and revering the individuality of each individual. And knowing that that means that care for the whole person, that I have to provide care that's not a standard way of caring for someone or being with someone and expecting others to be like everyone else. Cura personalis, or care for the whole person, is to highlight and to understand and to embrace the difference of each individual. That's care for the whole person, right? So the care that I give to one person is going to be completely different in caring for another person. You know, I always also, when we talk about care for the whole person, I think it's also important to understand the whole idea of belonging. So Sean mentioned that in his question as well. What does it mean to belong? Well, I make a distinction between what we talk about in many ways and use the label or name inclusion versus belonging. For me, there's a difference. Inclusion means I can invite you into the community, right? So let's say for students at Jesuit, Catholics, and all universities, right? They're accepted into the community because of the work that they've done in high school, the grades they receive. They apply for this acceptance into the community and they're accepted, right? That's inclusion. But once you get to the community, you can be included in the community, but not feel that sense of belonging. Care for the whole person is, I'm going to make sure that you belong to this space. I'm going to make sure that, yes, you were included by your application and you received acceptance into this space. But once you get here, do you have the resources? Do you have the friendships? Do you have the relationships that are necessary for you to say, you know what, I really belong here. This is home for me. I can kick off my shoes. I can sit back, relax, open up the refrigerator. You know, when you can open the refrigerator in somebody's house when you're visiting, that's when you know you're at home. And so can you open the refrigerator of Loyola and get whatever you want to just eat and be a part of the community? That's the difference between inclusion and belonging. When I sit at the table, am I able to eat what everybody else eats? Am I able to engage and be a part and be honored for who I am, even though I don't look like, I don't believe like, I don't live like the majority of the people in the community? Will you still authentically embrace me? Will you still authentically love me for who I am in spite of the differences? In fact, will you embrace me because of my difference? See, that to me is care for the whole person. When I feel like I belong, then I know that I'm being cared for. And so that's the work for me of Interfaith and Ecumenical Ministries. Not necessarily expecting people to take on the same characteristics or having to assimilate in ways that make them quote unquote fit in, but you fit in because you're different, not because you're the same. And that to me is the core work of Interfaith and Ecumenical existence and service inside of this community and in the world today.
Rev Scott, thank you for opening that door and naming that. When we think about care for the whole person, there's a number of stories from Ignatius's life that come to mind for me, and I think that as this man who is really trying to devote his life to God, right? He's a person who has this moment turning towards, right? He uses the word conversion, this turning towards God with love, turning towards, and that's what he means by that, turning towards God with love. And as he does that, he starts to look and question a lot of the things that he does in his life. He starts to ask questions about what it means to be a soldier, and can he be a soldier? and at one point ends up putting down his sword to follow a new pathway. But I can't imagine that was an easy process for him, right? Because he was so much probably tied to that identity of some nobility, of being a soldier. And so he would go on to start talking about these things, the way that we're tied to things as attachments and freedoms. And in Ignatian spirituality, he's, calling us to freedom to follow God, to be able to see where God is. And I think as you were talking here, I was thinking about the attachments, because all we have to do is look at the history between religious traditions and the tensions that have been there. But there's also these amazing stories of where people have crossed those attachments to really find dialogue, to find cooperation. And I'm curious, as you think about this interfaith work that we engage in, there's a lot of things that we're attached to because of our identity, our experience, our faith traditions, our spiritualities. What do you see? What are the ways that we need to be able to be aware of what we're attached to and what we're seeking freedom for in this interfaith work? When you think about this, am I even talking about that in the right way, or do these have a place within interfaith cooperation and dialogue as we engage with each other?
Yeah, I think that one of the ways that we look at that, the first thing we need to understand when we're doing interfaith work, cooperation, and dialogue is to start introspectively. Start with self. Start with looking at self and reflection. I know that's a huge exercise and principle in Ignatian spirituality. But the first thing we have to look at is being self-aware and understanding who I am in this world. Who am I in this space? Who am I? As opposed to, so interfaith dialogue and cooperation isn't first looking at others and saying what they need to do to change. It's about looking at self and saying, what do I need to do to change? And those questions will begin to unfold and open up what or how we can then begin to detach from those things that are unhealthy and remain attached to those things that are beneficial, not just for me, but beneficial for everybody. So we're looking really at the principles. We're looking at fundamental principles. We're looking at virtues. We're looking at values. And we're doing a self-evaluation and an introspective assessment on the values that I hold most importantly. And then asking myself in a process of discernment, is this value that I'm holding for good for me? But more importantly, is it good for the greater good of others, right? Am I, again, caring for the whole person? Am I being for and with others with the value that I'm holding, the values and the virtues that I'm holding? And if I determine from that introspective assessment that it is not, that it could potentially be causing harm, that it could be potentially hurting others, then those are the things that I need to detach from. Those are the things that I need to turn away from and embrace those things, the virtues, the values, and the ways of being and behaviors and attitudes and all of the other things that would allow me to turn to God in love. When I turn to God in love, then I esteem others more highly than myself, in the words of the Apostle Paul, right? I begin to love others as I love myself, which Jesus says is the greatest commandment, or the second greatest commandment. But all of the laws and all of the principles and all of the virtues hinge on that love that you're talking about. So whenever I turn to God in love, that means I'm turning away and detaching from the darkness and the things that continue to cause harm or that don't work for the greatest good of those that I'm with. And then I begin the process. The turning is the first step. It's not the end game. Turning is the first step. Then I begin the process of living it out. Then I begin the process of being authentic in what I've turned to and turned away from. And that process of living it out is a lifelong endeavor. It never stops. Every day I'm trying to get better. Every day I'm trying to be the person that the world needs me to be. Every day, not just for my little siloed space of myself and my family, but I am every day working towards peeling back the layers like an onion to become the person that will reflect the love that I've turned to radiate the love from an inside out perspective. It starts inwardly and works outwardly. So often we're operating from a place where we try to change the external environment before we change the internal disposition. But what we have to do is begin with the inward self and be changed from the inside out. Once we change on the inside, then we can start working on how we might be able to build authentic and beloved community. But that's the turning, and that's the way that we begin to start this process of being for and with others, by being authentic to myself and who I am created to be, who I am purposed to be in this world. And who I'm purposed to be in this world isn't just about me, but it's about others. And it's about how we can begin to create that space of beloved community and cultivate that in a way that is authentic and that is true and that represents and reflects the love that I've turned to as an individual.
We wanted to ask you about curiosity, but before I enter that question, I wanted to speak for myself. This part of what drives me to this work of interfaith, and I've been driven to this work of interfaith since I was very young. I can remember the first time I made friends with people outside of my faith tradition. I was 11 years old, and it was such a powerful connection to learn so young from other faith traditions. And I part from the premise that there is great wisdom in every tradition, and that my tradition has some great wisdom, but there's great wisdom in other traditions. And one of the great gifts for me of doing this work is learning. One of the most beautiful concepts I've learned from my Jewish friends is that whole and it's not just a concept, they live it. That whole idea of radical hospitality is so embedded in the way that I've learned to be in relationship with my friends in that community. And so Sean had thought about this question, which I think follows nicely. And the question is, for Ignatius, his curiosity led him to look for God beyond what he was taught. He came to recognize that we experience God through our whole selves and in all our encounters and experiences. What role does curiosity play in your encounter, engagement, relationships with individuals, communities of different faith traditions and beliefs? So really, how does curiosity factor in all this?
Yeah, first of all, let me just say I love the language, and we talk about this often, Paula, around radical hospitality. And I think radical hospitality is inextricably tied to curiosity, right? So hospitality is one thing. We know hospitality is, or many of us define hospitality as ensuring that we're inviting people into the spaces that we occupy to make them feel welcome and to feel at home. That's hospitality. But when you put radical hospitality in front of that, you're saying that you're doing something very different or something at a much deeper level than what the the definition of hospitality is alone. So when we're talking about radical hospitality, we're also we're talking more about not inviting people into the space that you occupy. That's one thing. That's a part of radical hospitality. But true radical hospitality is going out and engaging in spaces that others occupy so that I become a guest. And I say that that is being inextricably tied to curiosity, because I have to be curious to want to be in the space, to want to be present with others. I have to be curious and wanting to know about others and to learn about the spaces that they occupy. So, and it takes a certain level of humility and vulnerability to be a guest. See, when we invite people into our space, right, they feel that sense of, there's a sense of vulnerability in going into a new space. But we have to also go into other spaces and experience that vulnerability and learn from. But the only way to do that is to be curious. Curiosity is what motivates us to go to the other side. See, we talk oftentimes about bridge building in this work. We're trying to build bridges and create cooperation and dialogue and build relationships and do what I often say make surprising friendships possible. Yes, that's foundational. But the only way to make surprising friendships possible is that after you build the bridge, you use the bridge. And the bridge is a two-lane way of going. It's going and coming. And we have to go to the other spaces on the other side of the bridge, not just inviting other people into our space, but we have to use the bridge as well. See, we utilize this analogy of bridge building, where I think we've come to a place where the habit of building bridges is the work. And then we move on to the next bridge and never use the bridge that we build. Interfaith dialogue and cooperation is not just building bridges, but it's also building and using the bridges and not expecting those to come to our side of the other side of the bridge. But those of us who are building the bridges has to be a reciprocal, mutual way of being together and going to each side and using this dualistic highway of going back and forth to other spaces. So curiosity is the fundamental character trait of this work. Curiosity is the motivation. Paula, as you said, you love to learn. Well, curiosity is the motivation behind learning. Curiosity is the driving force behind understanding and research. Curiosity is what pushes us to become self-aware and to seek to understand others, to reflect on who we are. Curiosity has to be the grounding aspect of that. Without curiosity, we become incarcerated in individualism and not honoring, and I'm not saying not to honor individuality. There's a difference between individuality and individualism. Individualism is grounded in self-centered understanding of self, and that's it. But individuality or moving beyond that individualism to reflect on and be curious about who others are inspires us to do interfaith work. Curiosity inspires us to engage in dialogue and cooperation. In fact, I would go so far as to say interfaith is curiosity and curiosity is interfaith. And they're inextricably connected.
Curiosity, as you talk, that's an interesting, as you talk about that engagement and that curiosity, and as you were talking about the bridge, right, going back and forth, I'm curious if you would talk about, this is something that comes up a lot in the work that we do. Interfaith work at a Jesuit Catholic university. Interfaith work in general, I think, is that there as we enter into it, I think there are many people have concerns, right? Well, what you're asking me to do is to move out of my home, my spiritual home, right? People have this perception. Oh, it's about leaving my spiritual home and finding something and creating something new, right? And oftentimes, I don't know if my wife will be upset that I share this story, but when Shannon and I first moved into when we moved into our first apartment together, it was an apartment that I had been living in already. And I remember the day we moved in, we went and got her stuff, we brought it over, and then we started bringing it into the house, into the apartment. And as we were setting it up, she stopped and looked at me, and I was like, "What?" Because I could tell something wasn't right. And she said, "This is not our space." And I said, "What do you mean it's not our space? This is our space." She said, "Your stuff is already here, and you're asking me to put my stuff incorporated into your space, right?" And I was like, "Well, what else will we do?" And she saw the natural way forward, and she's like, "We need to pull everything out and imagine the space together." Right. And so we pulled everything out of the apartment, and then we had a conversation about what this would look like as we put it together. Right. So I sometimes, which I think is important, curiosity. I think imagination is we're talking, what can we imagine as creating new spaces? But I think there's a tension when I talk with people, and I'm curious if you encounter this and what your advice is, as someone who is a senior pastor and is involved in this work of interfaith dialogue and cooperation. The tensions that you might encounter. What advice do you give to people about do people need to let go of what they have to enter into something completely new? Is that what we're asking people to do here?
I absolutely want to, well, first talk about that tension in engaging this work, right? So the tension that I've experienced and had to navigate through is this question of, well, if I engage in these other faith traditions or ideas, practices, spaces, I'm going to dilute my faith. I'm going to say emphatically that is the furthest thing from the truth. By engaging in this interfaith work, this ecumenical work that I've been doing now for close to 20 years, it has enhanced my faith. It has changed my life. It has transformed my way of being. I'll share this real quick, this quick story. When I first started hospital chaplaincy, and I was entering into this space, I had been indoctrinated by a fairly conservative church, more on the conservative side than the liberal side of church. Many African American faith, black churches, black Christian churches tend to be more on the conservative side, right? So I was immersed in that space, and I went to Johns Hopkins Hospital to serve as a chaplain resident in a program, and I was in a cohort of a team of chaplains from all faith traditions. And one of the members of that cohort, who's probably one of my best friends now and is still as a mentor, was a officer in the National Guard, in the Army, and he served as a Army chaplain. And I enter into this space, again, brand new, indoctrinated from my church tradition, and I say, listen, I can't minister to people who are from different faith traditions because I have to tell them about Jesus Christ so that they can be saved. Now that's how that's the evangelism that we engage in many of the spaces that I was occupying. I can't just, if a patient is dying on the hospital bed and and they're a Muslim, then I have to try to get them to accept Jesus Christ before they die so they can go to heaven, not knowing that that wasn't about the patient, but it was about me, right? It was more about me and what I felt like I needed to do to be a good Christian. And what he sort of, and I won't talk about the process, but what my friend and mentor shared with me was his story of being on the battlefield and him having to minister to soldiers who were dying and having to be present with them as the last thing that they or person or experience that they would have. Not their family, but he as the chaplain. And he said, now the one thing that I don't ever want to do is to create a tension that is so deep in that person that they don't die a peaceful death. So I have to be who they need me to be in order to serve and to love them as they transition from life to the next space and the next phase. And it hit me. And I realized that the rigidity of what I was thinking and believing was more about my own feeling and my own belief. But when we engage in this work, it has to be about the people that we're serving. It has to be about the love that we talk about. It has to be that authentic love and that authentic relationship that we're in for humanity, for being, that's care for the whole person. That person is whatever faith tradition they believe in, that's their identity. So I say all that to say that the way that we engage this work isn't about changing the whole space. It's not about relinquishing what we believe and forcing people to believe what I believe. And you got to design your space around what I tell you you need to design your space. No. What it is about is entering into these spaces and bringing yourself, your identity, and your story. See, it's about power of story. And so when we use that two-way bridge going across, I'm bringing myself, my identity, and that story, and I'm hoping you welcome me into that space. And when you welcome me into that space, I'm leaving a portion of me in that space, and hopefully you can begin to see some other broader perspective of something that you had never known before. And I leave that with you, but I also take with me your story so that when I go back to my community, I share what you gave me with my community. So we begin to always operate in this constant process of evolution and change. And we're cultivating and we're becoming better. That's that process that I was talking about. It's that continuous way of being better. And the only way that we're going to be able to be better is if I take stories from the spaces that I visit and encounter and engage and bring that back to my space and share that with others. Now that's true evangelism. When I can share what I've learned and how it's impacted me with the community that I'm in so that we don't stay in this rigid space, that we stay this monolithic space that we're afraid to change, that we can hear the story. Not only that, we're inviting other communities and other faith traditions into our space so that they can share their story directly. And then all of us go back to our respective spaces. We engage with the rituals and traditions that we've always engaged in. There's nothing wrong with that. We embrace who we are as a community. And we celebrate who we are as a community and our unique identities. But we also are willing to hear, listen, and see other perspectives that allow us to enhance who we are. And we don't stay in this rigid, legalistic way of being that's unchanging and unyielding. That's how you build and make surprising friendships possible. That's how you cultivate beloved community. That's how you create a space where everybody is accepted and we accept difference, and not only accept difference, but yet we are intentional about celebrating difference with others and other communities and other faith and belief systems. And we find the similarities, but that's not the only thing. We so often we talk about we got to find the similarities when we're doing interfaith work. We have to find the similarities. Yes, we do. But we also have to embrace the difference and say, wow, I might not believe that way, but that's amazing. And how does that connect with what I believe? How does that difference, how can that help me to be more introspective about who I am? Does it give me to say, one of the things that I think is one of the most powerful things that we can ever say to ourselves is, wow, I never thought of it that way. Wow. I never thought of it that way. And that's when we know we're doing that true introspective work. And that's when I say, Paula, it's grounded and motivated by that curiosity. You got to be curious to do that. And you have to have an intense desire to really want to be in community with. You have to want to be adjacent to others. And adjacency is grounded in empathy.
And so this idea of difference, I think sometimes we often want to say that, oh, well, we don't want to focus on the difference. The difference is where we're going to get into trouble. But I think, as you're saying, that difference leads us to seeing something more beautifully, maybe even, not even maybe, to seeing the world through this whole other beautiful lens that maybe we haven't used. So I just wanted to say thank you for naming the importance of honoring, respecting, and cherishing difference in this work.
I just wanted to add to what Sean said and what I gather from what you're saying and what I've come to understand is that the difference is where we grow as people, right? As we were preparing for this conversation with you, Sean and I were talking about, different experiences we've had. And it's really interesting because I think communication is so central to this work, right? And a lot of the literature on dialogic communication and ways in which we can confirm others rather than disconfirm others in conversations become really important when you're having interfaith dialogue. But I was sharing with Sean how in one of my interfaith community encounters, I was challenged by someone to explain something about my own faith tradition that I initially took as an offense. And so we talked a little bit about the story of Ignatius, and maybe Sean, you may want to bring that up again. But for me, there's that curiosity, and then after that curiosity is that actually engaging with the other, and that engagement can be sometimes difficult, right? Because we come from different faith traditions, and that faith informs even the way in which we sometimes speak to each other. So some of us may come from a very heartfelt emotional place, and others may come from a more intellectual debate, argument, theological argument kind of place. And it's so easy to start creating animosity right off the bat if we don't understand how our faith and how we've been grown and brought up in that faith even inform the way we speak to one another. And I think it's so important because this is all in the context of the Ignatian year. I always come back to that presupposition and the idea of when we're encountering the other, particularly in an interfaith encounter, that we really strive to put the best interpretation on the other, right? That we give them the benefit of the doubt, that we always start from a place of like, ooh, that may have come up as offensive to me, but let me continue digging deeper. This is this is a work that I'm doing out of love and trying to understand. So really let me try to understand. And if there is something that came out as offensive or hurtful at first, let me continue in dialogue, having that desire to really try to find that message, that God-given message, that way of just giving that person the best interpretation possible.
One of the things that came up for me was the whole idea of not just embracing difference, not just finding the similarities, not just having dialogue and cooperation, but there's also this responsibility that each of us have for our respective faith traditions and communities to critique our particular faith traditions and communities as well. So the more we broaden our perspective and gain insight and understanding, there is a responsibility for us to critique. I had to critique the space that I was in when I began to learn as a hospital chaplain what evangelism is. And I had to critique whether or not my community that I was a part of, that I love. See, part of love is being able to point out and identify things that aren't that positive in the spaces that you are. That's introspection. So we have to be able to critique the communities that we're in, just as we introspectively look at ourselves and say, what are the values and virtues that we talked about earlier individually? What are the values and virtues that might not be beneficial to others that I hold? And how do I detach myself from that? We also have to be willing to critique our own communities. That's being grounded in truth and being grounded in love. And so when we learn better ways of being, then we also have a responsibility to do better and to have the courage. See, this is where I think many of us refuse to operate from a place of integrity, because once we learn better, and then we have the responsibility to have the courage to say to our community, "Y'all, this is the space," and we're seeing something that's not very healthy for us and for those that we're engaging in. And so I think that's also important as well. So that when I go back to my community and take the stories back across that bridge, I go back to my community and I say, look, we're learning something new. I do that in my church all the time. And it's not an easy conversation to have, but it's also about looking at who we are and that collective introspection that we as a community have to look at and say, okay, how can we be better as well? So I think that's important. The other thing, Paula, as you were saying, I know this probably is minimizing. I don't want it to be a superficial analogy, right? But this is what comes to mind. So when we're in relationship, I think what you were getting at is that when we're in relationship with others, we have to identify the differences and go deeper into why what we are experiencing and encounter are different, and how can we find that space where we can accept one another and be authentic with one another, right? So I think about marriage. I think that is something that is so essential in marriage, right? When my wife and I first got married, I come from a space where, and this might sound funny, but it's true, it's real. I come from a home and grew up in a home where we put bread in the refrigerator. That's what we did. My wife came from a home where we didn't. They did not put bread in the, so when we went to the grocery store, I'm putting bread in the refrigerator and she comes and takes it out. And I'm saying, why did you take the bread out of the refrigerator? I said, who puts bread in the refrigerator? Who does that? We do, right? So what I had to do was begin to look and try to figure out, why does she not put bread in the refrigerator? But when I began to eat the bread and it was warm and it was softer than what it was when I ate the bread that I've eaten all my life, I began to grow an affection for having bread that sits on the shelf and not in the refrigerator, right? So I evolved as I say all that to say, I never thought of it that way. I never tasted it that way. I never experienced it that way. And I've come to realize that what my wife was doing was a better way for me than what I was doing as I had grown up, right? So I say all that to say there is always the potential for a better way that's more beneficial. And when we experience and really begin to say, okay, instead of being putting our hands up and saying no, the 7 deadliest words in the English language, this is how we have always done things. This is how we've always done it, right? Take the opportunity to try the bread that's not refrigerated. Instead of saying, this is how I've always done it, take the bread and try something different. You might like it. But that doesn't mean I stopped eating bread. Are y'all with me today? So that's like I said, I didn't want to minimize this conversation with a conversation about bread, but it's so clear to me that I didn't stop eating bread. I just tried it in a different way. So I say all that to say that's part of the process of seeking first to understand. It's a principle. Seek first to understand and then to be understood.
We talked about differences. We've talked about curiosity. And for Ignatius, I think as we're telling the story of Ignatius, one of the things that opened Ignatius's eyes in a new way were the stories, that he had to read when he was recovering. And they were these stories of saints, lives of the saints. And as he read them, he started to notice these different feelings within himself. And he was curious about it, right? He was curious about what were those feelings. As you think about who we are in the world, as you think about as we enter into the world, as you think about the relationships you have in the world, who are the examples in this work that you look to and uplift?
I would say three specific individuals that come to mind. I mean, it's so many. But 3 prominent individuals come to mind for me initially, like Ignatius, Jesus Christ. When I read the story of Christ, and the more I read about Jesus's ministry in the world, I've come to, again, be changed in perspective, because the Christ that I now read is not the same Christ that I read 20 years ago when I was first introduced. The Christ I now read is a minister of interfaith dialogue and cooperation that transcended all boundaries and divisions, that was rooted and grounded in love. That Christ was a radical revolutionary who engaged in work that was extremely unsafe, but he did it for the betterment of the world, right? So off the rip, it's Jesus Christ, right? For me, Christ is the epitome for what I strive to be and do. And again, very different than the Jesus that I was introduced to. and I continue to learn more. And I'm sure 10 years from now, Jesus will still be a very different example for my life, right? The second person is one of my heroes. I think most of you know, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Was, to me, again, a true representation of what interfaith dialogue and cooperation is. Even though he was a Baptist preacher from a Christian black church tradition, which I identify with, he said, before anything else, before a civil rights leader, before anything else, teacher, I am a black preacher. I am a preacher of the gospel of Jesus Christ, right? But that did not mean that he stayed siloed and did not have a deeper perspective of what social justice and the influences that drove his ministry. One of the particular influences being a prophet from India, Mahatma Gandhi, who came from a different faith tradition, was the very foundation of his theology and philosophy. Satyagraha, right? Soul force, nonviolent, direct action, was a direct descendant or was originated in Gandhi's philosophy. So King was interfaith. And so that influences me above so many different, on so many different levels, because I look to King's theology that's grounded in Christ, but also is influenced by other faith traditions and the civil rights movement. That is an interfaith movement in and of itself, because it brought so many different people from so many different backgrounds and faith traditions to create one common goal. And that's to see justice in the world. For me, that's the epitome of beloved community, right? And then the third person is a woman who I have come to admire almost as much as Dr. King, who was influenced by King, and that's Bell Hooks. And Bell Hooks was an African-American woman who belonged to the LGBTQ plus community and was a practicing Buddhist, right? The epitome of interfaith. The epitome of what it means to identify outside of the normal context of what we deem as normal. And her way, her identity, her essence of who she is, her writings, her speeches, her very being is, she just recently passed, but is something that I strive to learn more about and continue to challenge myself to be like. So like I said, many different people, but those are three prominent examples of, I think, what truly reflect this work, and one, inspire me and inform me to continue to go through this process of being in this world in a very, and listen, I don't get it I don't get it right all the time, but to strive to be that person that reflects those who that level that I aspire to reach to.
As you talked about these justice movements in history, and you said they were interfaith movements, which, right, they were. I mean, those are interfaith movements. And we could have a conversation about, is justice even possible if it's not interfaith?
No. We don't need a podcast for that. No.
There it is. One word and we've done. Right.
No, it's not.
Right.
It is absolutely not possible.
Father General Sosa talked about Ignatius the Pilgrim, right? I mean, Ignatius described himself as a pilgrim, and I think that's really a great way to think about interfaith work, is that we have never really reached our destination, and that as a pilgrim we set off looking for God, not with the expectation of I know where I'm going to find God, like a tourist. I'm not going to this site and I'm not going to this site. I'm going to site, but I'm going to walk and I'm going to encounter and I'm going to be curious, right? And so as we do this work, and I really want to really uplift something that you, when we first talked about having an assistant director for Interfaith and Ecumenical Ministries, there was this hope that we would be able to have an interfaith prayer service that we would host to bless the year. And you came to Loyola and you imagined it and you animated it, and you've given we've watched it evolve through the pandemic. And I just wanted to give you the opportunity to talk a little bit about the Hope and Renewal Interfaith Prayer Service, and maybe point people towards that who might be listening to this podcast.
The Hope and Renewal Prayer Service. I want to invite everybody to come. We have done this for, I think now, this is the 5th one that we've engaged and that we've created to bless the community and the university for the spring semester in an interfaith way. We have Mass of the Holy Spirit in the fall to bless the community. Well, we have a second blessing of the community for the spring season, spring semester, that is interfaith. And I think that speaks volumes to what Loyola is trying to do, to move towards a space where there is more belonging. We're doing well in inclusion, but we need to continue to do more around the idea of belonging. And this is a way that everybody is reflected. One of the faculty members, I'll just share this, one of the faculty members who came to the first Hope and Renewal prayer service came to me after it was over with tears in her eyes. And she said, I finally feel like I have a place to call home, that this service has made me feel that I'm seen here, and I feel like now I can say I have a home here. So that's really the foundation of what we're trying to do. We bring faith leaders from various spaces in different faith communities to come and share their insights, their ideas, their reflections, their prayers, their love for our community from their particular space. And we have that message of hope and renewal. And each year we just come together, and so many different people are able to receive a blessing from spaces that they probably had never received a blessing from, or insight from, or reflection from. And what it does is it promotes making surprising friendships possible. So if you can make it February 3rd at 3 p.m. in Alumni Chapel, well, either it will be a hybrid service because we're still in pandemic mode, but you can either watch it live streamed, or we'll have limited space inside the chapel for you all to come and really celebrate life, new life in the new season that is on the way, spring season, where we're seeing renewal of life in the spring, and hopefully a renewal of hope that is to come, especially in the midst of a pandemic. Now, hope is not wishful thinking. I want to say that as the last thing I say. When we talk about hope and renewal, renewal is renewed life that comes every year. after it's been dormant for a minute, renewed life. But hope isn't wishful thinking. When we talk about hope and renewal, we're talking about a hope that is a confident expectation of what's to come. It's not I hope and I wish and I wish upon a star. It's not a Disneyland theology, but it is a hope that says this is a confident expectation, an anticipation that I know what I need and what I long for is on the way. And that's how we enter into this space for hope and renewal. We're entering into this space that I know what I need is coming. Nothing can stop it. Nothing can terminate it. Nothing can obstruct it. But hope is the confident expectation that I know that what we need and what we're longing for is coming. And so that's what the Hope and Renewal Prayer Service is. Thank you all for allowing me to give that shout out of what we're looking to do and what we're looking to accomplish on February 3rd. So thank you again, and it's just been a pleasure to be here today.
Reverend Scott, it has been a true gift to be able to share this little bit over an hour with you and learn from your own experience and just relish in your wisdom. We thank you again for all the work, the great work that you have done and continue to do at Loyola. May you continue the strength to do that work, and we are so blessed and grateful to be your colleagues and friends in this.
Much appreciated to you too as well. Thank you.